We are learning Likkutei Sichot Volume 1 for Parshas Behar, and we're up to chapter 10. We're in the middle of chapter 10. And we are discussing the paradox of Mount Sinai and why the Torah, why the sages constantly say that Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Why is it important? And in our context, it's that we say that the Shemitah, just as the Shemitah was received from Sinai, its general and particular laws, so all the mitzvahs were received at Sinai. Why is Sinai such an important aspect of the Torah? So we said that the Torah has to be received with lowliness. Shiftless, as we call it in Hebrew. But then the Rebbe says, if it's so important for the Torah to be something that's connected to shiftless, why wasn't it given in a valley or in a canyon, even lower, in the Dead Sea, underwater, even lower than the Dead Sea? So the answer is that it's not enough for a person to have just lowliness. There also has to be a sense of grandeur, of greatness. That is from the mountain. So that is symbolized by the mountain. So you have this mountain, which on the one hand is something that's very high, and it has pride, as it were. And on the other hand, it also has to be something that has shiftless, that has lowliness. And they have to come together. And that's a paradoxical state that the Rebbe has talked about many times in this volume. Right? The person has to have both what we call bittul. Bittul means that there's no one but me to do this task. Hashem can't wait for anyone else. The only one alive. As if there's, like the sages say, in the place where there's no one to do the task, you should be the person. You should never say, I delegate it to someone else, I'll wait for someone else to do it. And that's a sense of pride, because it requires you to go and do something and say that you're important. On the other hand, there should be a complete sense of lowliness, which is that I don't hold myself important.
Pride is self-awareness of your capabilities.
It's a paradoxical state.
Not necessarily pride, it could just be self-awareness of your own...
No, it's not enough just to be self-aware. You have to have pride.
You have to know your capabilities.
Yeah, you have to realize what your capabilities are and utilize them. You can't wait for someone else. If you have that talent, if you have that ability, or if you're the only person in the area, the only thing with a pulse in the area, so you're the one who has to do it. You can't wait. So it says that is what Mount Sinai represents, this paradoxical state, this containment of two opposite movements. One is pride and one is lowliness together. And for that reason, he gave it in Mount Sinai. It says that that's the reason why the entire Torah is described as being received from Sinai. And Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. And it's called Halacha L'Moshe B'Sinai. That the halacha was received by Moshe at Sinai. There are certain halachos that's how we describe them. We don't know the source because it's not in the written Torah. It's already a type of Torah Sheba'al Peh. According to the Rambam, it means that Moshe Rabbeinu extrapolated it using the principles by which the written Torah is learned. But according to most of the commentaries, what it means is that Moshe Rabbeinu received it already at Sinai. He received a version of the oral Torah already without the extrapolation. And then in later generations, the sages came and they explained how you extrapolated from the written Torah. In any case, he received this from Sinai. Why? And at Shelefi Amur, so we're at the end of page 263, Yuvan Tachlit Torah Lekasher Shnei Hafachim. The purpose of the Torah, the Torah itself, is meant to connect opposites, to connect paradoxical, two opposite contradictory states. On the one hand, how? V'machif. So it's on one hand a mountain, on the other hand it's slowly. Machif is shafa. La'asot b'tachtonim dira lo yitbarach, because we're bringing the highest of the high, Hashem, into the mundane reality. So that's connecting the opposites. This is the special superior advantage of the giving of the Torah. Meaning, the giving of the Torah itself is a source from where this ability comes from. Because let's say Hashem would not have given the Torah himself. Let's say Hashem would have, like the Avos knew the Torah by some sense. So maybe they didn't have the exact wording. It would all be at the level of Ruach HaKodesh instead of being, maybe even Nevuah, but it wouldn't be the giving of the Torah. The special thing about the giving of the Torah is not the text that was given down. That text we would have had anyway. We had enough prophets, enough smart people to write that text down. That's not the point. The point is that Hashem had to give the Torah in order to give us that power to connect the mundane with the supernal. That can only come from Hashem. Of course, the moment that Hashem gives the Torah, so the whole Torah is permeated with that. Meaning that the whole Torah is the finite that contains the infinite. Even before that, the Torah would have been true. It would have been something that we would have been able to learn and extrapolate from, and many, many things. But he wouldn't have had the sense that the infinite is contained within each word. That comes from the giving of the Torah. So he says, this is what the giving of the Torah added. It's not just that it added more than the mitzvos that the patriarchs did anyway before we received the Torah. They knew about the mitzvos anyway. Which is described as a state of not being obligated and yet still doing it. They were not commanded to do all these mitzvos except for one, the circumcision, and they did them anyway. This also affected the universal obligations of mankind, which we call the 7 mitzvos of the Noachites. And even it affected those mitzvos that were already given by Moshe Rabbeinu to the people as they exited Egypt. When they came out of Egypt, they came to a place called Marah, and there he gave them Shabbos and Kibbutz Avayim and a few other things. Rather, the giving of the Torah affected this state that the Medrash describes as a decree that the heavens should not be connected to the earth. That was what the giving of the Torah affected, meaning that the supernal cannot be contained within the mundane. So the verse that represents this in the Tehillim is Hashemayim Shamayim LaHashem. The heavens are the heavens for God, and the earth He gave to man. Uvematan Torah batla gzera. And at the giving of the Torah, this gzera, this decree, was annulled. מאחר שכל עניין מתן תורה הוא חיבור שמיים וארץ, היה מתן תורה בהר סיני שעניינו מיזוג של שני הפכים. Because the giving of the Torah was meant to connect the heavens and the earth, it was done at Mount Sinai, where we have this paradoxical state of it being both high and low at the same time. לפיכך מודגש תמיד שהתורה ניתנה מסיני. That's why the sages constantly repeat that the Torah was given at Sinai. כאשר יבוא אדם ויטען כיצד אפשר לי לחבר שני הפכים. When a person comes and says, how can I connect two opposites? יאמר לו, מסיני ניתן לך כוח לדבר. He's told, this is what it means to give the Torah at Mount Sinai. This is what it means. That's where the power to do this came from. It's famous that when a person came to the Baal Shem Tov, he used to ask him, what do you remember? What's Gedanks do? But when people came to the Maggid, he used to ask them whether they remember the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So it's an interesting thing to ask someone. Do you remember it? So the answer is yes. What is the answer? By the Baal Shem Tov, what do you remember the answer? The correct answer, in a certain sense, was, I remember the nothingness before I was exist. For the Baal Shem Tov, the big thing was that to get over it, the Yeshus, the being of the world, and to connect to the non-being. That for him was the most important thing. By the Maggid, he was a little bit more, how should we say, less demanding. And he just said, do you remember the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai? What he meant was, do you understand the paradoxical state? Whether it's between being and non-being, between the other things, every person might have it in a different context. But do you hold by that? Are you able to connect the opposites? Do you feel that it's possible for a human being to be both a human being and to be godly? That's really the question. If you think it's impossible, and we're just, I call it the academic world, then in the end we're just human beings. So very nice. Go learn somewhere else maybe. But here I teach people how to be a human being and at the same time strive to be godly. That's what the Torah gave us. That's what the beginning of the Torah gave us. That's what the Rebbe is saying. If a person comes and asks, how can I connect two opposites? Many times the two opposites. Maybe today people don't connect so much to this idea that I can be godly. Maybe that's beyond them. Okay, so maybe godly not. But do you believe that you can, on the one hand, sustain yourself and also give a lot of tzedakah? Every person where he meets this paradox. אם בדומם הנחות שבכל הסוגים נתן הקדוש ברוך הוא של איחוד הפכים. כל שכן שבאדם. If on Mount Sinai, which is an inanimate object, there Hashem was able to reveal paradox. So all the more so that he can reveal paradox and connect the opposites in a human being. אפשר להכריח אותך לסגור את הדלת? סליחה. ודאי שישנו כוח לאחד שני הפכים ולתבוע ולבצע את הכוונה של דירה לא יתברך בתחתונים, שהתחתונים עצמם יהיו דירה לא יתברך. So that is the power that we receive at Mount Sinai, to make Hashem a dwelling place below. And even though Hashem cannot be contained below, that's exactly the strength that we were given. So for that you need Mount Sinai. For the writing of the Torah itself, so for that we had many prophets. We don't need the giving of the Torah. Hashem didn't need to give it in that sense. And a lot of people are confused that what it says that the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Yeah. So the Rebbe says here, I don't want to get into that question. I want you to accept that what we received at Mount Sinai is the power to carry opposites. Nesiat hafachim, or ichud hafachim, to unify the opposites. מיזוג שני ההפכים שהיה בהר סיני התבטא בפשטות בעניין של התנשאות וביטול. Here, for some reason in the Hebrew, they keep translating it as התבטול, but it's not. In the Yiddish, it's ביטול. So, התנשאות means, like we said, it's arrogance in a sense. It's being lofty. It's feeling lofty. So those are the two opposites that were connected. Lowliness and loftiness. מאחר שבתורה מופיע כל פרט בדייקנות. רמוז כאן נוסף לרמז הכללי של ייחוד מעלה ומטה גם העניין של ייחוד ההפכים של ההתנסות והביטול, כפי שהדבר צריך להיות באדם הלומד תורה ומקיים מצוות. And this needs to carry over from what we call the worlds, right? The Baal Shem Tov innovates this idea that there's world, souls, and divinity. The fact that Hashem can be in a paradoxical state, so that we already know from the 13th century. That was the biggest innovation of the 13th century. That we talked about this, the Kabbalistic innovation that you can't limit Hashem from having limits. You have to accept that he also contains limits. So he's both infinite and limited at the same time. So that was always known. The fact that the world can contain a paradox. So that we know from the Ark, from the Ark that was in the Holy of Holies in time and space. But the Chiddush of Chassidus is that this also has to carry over into souls. So the Baal Shem Tov's three dimensions are world, souls, and divinity. And in souls, this was not clear yet, until the Baal Shem Tov came. And said that every human being, every Jew, and therefore, by extension, every human being can reach a state. Where do you get it from? You get it from the Torah. What does it mean in the psyche? In the psyche it means to be both batel, to have bittul, and to have itnasut at the same time. Itnasut, very interestingly, is not where you would, maybe some people would put itnasut in the crown, but really itnasut is in malchus. So this is chokhmah and malchus. When you say bittul, that's chokhmah always. When you say itnasut, that's what the king feels. It's the excellency of the king. To be lofty is to be excellent. So on one hand you have to be excellent, on the other hand you have to be completely imbittul. So that's a big discussion, exactly what it means. But in any case, מספר הוראות בדבר. And now he's going to give a few practical applications of this. So we only have a couple of minutes, so let's try one or two of them. The first one is, תוקף הגבהת הרוח. לא להתבייש בפני המלגים, והתחלת כל השולחן ערוך. The first thing is not to be ashamed. Not to be embarrassed for my Yiddishkeit, or anything good that I do. It doesn't have to just be Yiddishkeit. Sometimes a person for teenagers, it's certainly a problem. We've got all this peer pressure. Let's say people ostracize, they don't like them. And so for a teen to go and sit next to them at lunch hour or something like that, that's like committing social suicide. But that's לא יבוש מפני המנהיגים. And if you're staunch in what you do, then the world will accept it. But you have to not be ashamed of it. And that's why it's the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. Because to do the Shulchan Aruch, if you don't have az panim legehenom, it's one of the things that was said, that you have to be willing to go into Gehenna. You have to have so much boldness that you're willing to go into a state of Gehenna. If you don't have that, then it's really the Shulchan Aruch. Right. That's the Azutik Busha that Jews have. That before the giving of the Torah, we were the Azin Shebaumot. We were the boldest of the nations. And then the Torah calmed us down. But the boldness was not lost. It was transmuted. It was taken and applied to keeping the Torah. It's the same boldness. There's no need to be impressed by any factor in the world. The person has to be filled with conviction, with the right type of conviction to learn Torah and to do the mitzvahs. And secondly, another application, hitbatlut v'anava. So here we have bitul, again, in the Yiddish it's bitul v'anava. Bitul v'anava are really, like we said, bitul is chokhmah and anava is always bina. Harei ne'emar al hagaon en ani... Yeah, anava is always bina. Anava, it says anava and yira. Because also, the anava was the earlier, before Kabbalah, the anava was the one that they usually associated with bina. Harei ne'emar al hagaon. What does the anava mean? Anava in the Talmud means something very simple. It says a person does something and he doesn't hold himself in esteem for having done it. It's said about Rabbi Chia, I think, that he never stopped speaking Torah and he never held himself in any esteem for that. That's anava. So the Rebbe talks about this a lot, that anava means, not in Chassidus, and anava means that a person knows his qualities. He's not aware of
gifts.
He knows what they are.
Attributes them to God.
And he attributes them to Hashem, and says Hashem gave them to me, so they're not mine. But it's not that he doesn't know what they are, and he needs to know enough to be able to use them the right way. In any case, it's said about pride, and normally we say that if a person has pride, then Hashem says, I can't dwell with him in the same place. So you have to have bittul. So here he says the opposite of pride is bittul. It's an interesting take, but that's how we would normally understand it. So nafshika afalo kolti az ptach libi b'toratecha v'mitzvotecha. So you have to have a feeling of I'm like the dust of the earth. And now, when you feel like that type of lowliness, then Hashem opens your heart to understand Torah. Ve'en shnei inyanim elu. So now we have two opposites. We have that on the one hand you have to feel a sense of boldness, of strength, of pride in what you're doing. The other side is that you have to feel that you're lowly, like the right. So how do you put these two things together? Normally these two things can't go together. Tokef v'agbaha, on the one hand boldness and conviction, and the other hand bittul and anava. How can these two סותרים זה לזה? They're opposites. שכן התוקף שיש לאדם, היא לא נפעם מהרגשת ישותו ומציאותו העצמית. Because the conviction that a person has shouldn't come from his feeling of self. I don't know, I need to check the translation here. Something seems fishy. In any case, on the one hand, he knows that everyone else is better than him. That's what anava here. It means anava like a sense of lowliness. Anava really exactly means that I know my gifts, but I attribute them to Hashem. That's the regular explanation in Chassidus. I think here is, I imagine that he said anava, but I have to understand why he calls this here anava, because anava is not usually lowliness. In any case, so that's the part that Har Sinai was the lowest of all the mountains. And still he has conviction and boldness in keeping Torah and mitzvot. Because he understands that he's doing Hashem's will. And because he's so engrossed, he's so caught up in God's will, so he doesn't feel himself, but he has all the conviction in the world that he needs in order to go and do what's needed. Let's finish. So he's in a perfect state, a complete state of bittul. He's completely devoted to Hashem, and here it's almost because of that, because he's so devoted to Hashem, he's not thinking about himself. So he has all the conviction that he needs, all the excellence of spirit in order to do what he needs to do. And that's what it means to receive the Torah and to perform it out of Mesiras Nefesh. And it's an amazing thing that it just takes. It's so easy to see the difference between somebody who's doing things because he feels that he's important, and somebody who's doing things because he's a shaliach, because he feels that Hashem gave him the duty. And you see that he's not a person who's doing it out of conviction. He doesn't care about himself. Doing it out of conviction that Hashem sent him. He doesn't care about himself. So some people call me names. Okay, some people call me names. They'll think I'm strange. Yeah, I'm sad. Some people, yeah. But I'm not afraid to add more to that by forming Torah mitzvahs. Okay, in any case, so that's the first application. There's a few others that we won't get to because tomorrow we'll switch to the Chukosa. Because tomorrow's Lag BaOmer. So we have to read the Lag BaOmer.
You have a talucha in your shul?
Yes, we're having one this year.
What time?
In the afternoon, I think 5:30. If I'm not mistaken, 5:30 to 7:30, something like that, or 5 to 7.
I'm Lag BaOmer?
I'm not going in Gana Kippur.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're not going to Meron, right?
No, I never go to Meron.